Hey, what's up, guys? Today I'm going to be making a tutorial on how I got Marshall as a Grandmaster Storm Wizard. So I'm going to be covering deck setup as well as gear setup and just offering some tips and tricks for people who want to give it a shot. I highly recommend it. So without further ado, let's get into the gear setup. So for my hat, I'm rocking the Snow Crusher's Galvanic Shroud. This one's really nice because it gives a Darkwind card, Pierce, typical Mali hat. Then I've got the Mali robe, also typical. There's the Highland robe, but it doesn't give the Pierce, so I like the Mali one. I highly recommend these two items are a must. Then for boots, I'm going for the Hailstorm Stormy Slippers. It's really nice. It gives some health, some pips, resist, accuracy, so some generally good stats. There isn't really anything comparable to these boots other than one Pierce variation. Definitely don't run the Mali boots, but there's one other Pierce variation that works, but you go down in pips with it. So I still think this one's better. So then for wand, I run the Celestial Photon Axe. There's some debates about the wand, which wand to use. There's three of them, and you can kind of see what works for your playstyle. I definitely shuffle through them a bit, but this one gives 5 Pierce, 11 damage, and 2 Storm Wands. That's kind of the pitfall of this wand, is that it only gives 2 Storm Wands, versus the Aquilin Villette Lance gives 3 Storm Wands, but you go down in damage. You do get the Makehouse Calypso, which has like a 1 in 12 chance of casting, from what I've tested. Um, but yeah, I definitely prefer the Celestial Photon Axe. The only other comparable wand would be the Shockblade of the Hoarder, which gives 4 Storm Wand cards, but you do go down in Pierce. So at least for me, I feel like the trade-off isn't worth it, especially if you're running, the Electric Elf pet. I think it's fine to have 2 blades, or two wands. Then for the Atheme, I'm running the Gurtok Telluric Steel. Pretty typical with damage, health, and pips jewels. This is kind of the only one you can do unless you have the Cerberus one, which is not available, at least at the moment. For the amulets, I'm going with the Blue Star Amulet. You can get it in Grizzleheim, or I think maybe it's the Vesterland. I have to double check on it, but you guys can check it out on Wiz Central. But this one's really nice because it gives the 12 flat resist, which is good. So 212 flat damage reduction. And so the reasoning behind this is that if someone DOTs me, I actually end up just through one DOT, end up have it ends up being worth it, the equivalent of the other amulet, which gives 45 health. So that's kind of the logic behind why I like this one. The only downside is if I get one shot, which doesn't really happen with this strategy very often. So definitely prefer the Blue Star Amulet in that regard. Then for rings, the 2 rings you can kind of go are the Gurtok Fulgus Circlet. I think I pronounced that right. Gurtok Fulgus Circlet. And then the Great Inventor Storm Ring. So the Great Inventor Storm Ring is by far superior because you get that extra 2% power pip as well as the additional like 20 health. So this one's definitely superior, but if you can't get this one, you can farm Ballister or get the packs for this one. But I think that the Inventor one's definitely the better one. For pets, I've run a lot of different pets. I'll kind of go through them all, but I think for at least a beginner to intermediate starting out, and even advanced as well, I think that this is like the only viable pet. So 4% Pierce, 611 resist, 11 damage, 9 accuracy. This is actually 10 accuracy because this is a 2.0 pet, even though it appears as 9. And so, yeah, that I think the extra resist is really good. You go down in 1 Pierce if you run Mighty. What a lot of people don't realize, since they're trying to stay under 87, is that they think they're over with the 88 damage, but in reality, the pet is at like 10.5, so it's still worth it. Versus if you don't have Mighty, you're at like 9 point something. So it's not, I think you're at like 9.6 or 9.8. So you don't actually have that full 10, even though it displays 10, but with the Mighty, you have over 10. So this is technically like 87.3 or 4 damage. So luckily it doesn't hit the cap. Then for mounts, I run the Clockwork Corsair mount, which gives the 2 Pierce. This one's definitely the best with this setup. There's some variation. So, I mean, if you don't want to run the Clockwork Corsair, so, I mean, one viable option, if you say you wanted to run the Aquilian Villette wand, is you could run the Chompy Bronto mount and then potentially run like another pet like a Scaly Frillosaurus, and you'll end up with 87 damage and similar Pierce. But you lose out on the Lightning Elf cards, so, you know, it's kind of pros and cons there. Then for deck, I run Cards of the Duelist, which gives the 4% Jewel for pips. This one's by far the best deck, but you can't really get it anymore. So otherwise, you can get the reduced sideboard deck, which I think gives 5 less sideboard, maybe 10. I think it's 5. And you can also socket a 4% Jewel. So that's pretty decent. So overall, just going back to the general stats, 88% damage. This is technically 87. It's just rounded up right now. It's like 10.5. So it's like 87.5 damage with the 87 damage cap. Resist 33. This is actually like 32. Resist 30. Storm 33. This is actually like 29.7. But yeah, that's fine. And then accuracy is 32. This one's actually true 32 accuracy. So overall, pretty solid stats. 4,000 to 2,425 health. And then for the advanced stats, the armor pierce 17. Pretty solid, 84 pip chance. So overall, pretty solid general stats. And I think this is by far the best Storm setup. There's a couple variations. I won't really go into them because I think that this one covers, you know, the best strategy, at least for this particular deck to work. There's other year setups that will work without this deck. So, yeah, I will maybe make a separate video on that, maybe like an advanced gear changes based on deck video. But here we have the main deck. So, and I'll walk through every card and why I use it, what schools it's good against, because you kind of want to, you know, tailor your deck to be able to do well against all schools. And so you have to make sure you can really survive against all schools. And so I run a pretty minimal deck just so that I can pull as much cards as needed. I definitely fluctuate through this deck, so I will be changing this deck like every 2 days. I think everyone should change their deck every, you know, day or two. Try out, you know, switching a card and slowly iterate on that and see what works for you. I'm not sure if this deck will work for anyone just because I know it really, really well. And my style for deleting cards is very exact. So just know that even if you copy this exact deck, it takes a lot of time to get used to. But once you're used to it and once you can, you know, fully understand the ins and outs of it, it can be really useful. But it may be good to, you know, start with this and then maybe build a deck through first principles, and you'll probably end up better off. But I wanted to make this, you know, guide just to show you at least a baseline reference to what a viable deck would look like. So here we have 2 Glacial Fortresses. This is primarily to combat death. So 2 in the main deck. And, you know, this is really just anti the plague spamming, or not plague, sorry, infection spamming into vampire. And so with Glacial Fortress, you can remove that, get some shields, and really just counter that strategy. So if you're going against death and they're using that strategy, it's like you kind of win. And if you're going with death with another strategy, what's really nice is I have 3 of the ether shields, so it's pretty solid going against death. From that regard, but yeah, that's why we have 2 Glacial Fortresses in. I have 4 in total, including my sideboard, which is pretty solid. So mainly just to counter the death strategy. Also, if some balance wizards will stop you from satering, since you kind of want to satyr, not bury surprise against balances, they'll sometimes threefold fever you. So this is also good against balances because it gives you the 3 shields. And if you have a fire shield up, then it works out really well. Then we have stun block. So stun block is obviously really good against storm. You really want to pull this immediately. It's good against myth. It's good against ice. One recommendation against ice is some people like to winter moon spam. So they'll winter moon you, stun you to remove the stun block, then winter moon you again, and kind of do that on repeat. And that can be pretty annoying. So it's good to get that up. Also myth, really just good to have that up against myth in case, say you have a weakness on them and they have 4 pips and they stun you into like an obsidian colossus, then they can just kill you. So you just really have to get that stun block up against myth, and yeah, those are the primary schools to combat it. And typically 2 is enough to pull it. If I'm fighting storm, I'll start deleting cards heavily until I pull it, and just like fight off my side deck in the meantime until I pull it. And then I pack 1 Tranquility. This is really just against myth and fire. It's good to have if they start trap stacking against you. It's a really nice, because sometimes you'll get into this situation where you'll shield, they will betrayal, and then you'll shield again, they'll betrayal again, and then you have all of a sudden you have 3 traps on you, and it's almost like they're waiting for you to run out of shields, and you're waiting for them to run out of betrayals. But what kind of ends this is this Tranquility, because it just removes all the traps and gives you a heal, and normally you can survive. So that's kind of what this is kind of like a last resort spell here. Also against fire as well, they do it. Also balance with feint spams. It's for sure useful. So, but I only pack 1 because it doesn't happen too frequently, and I'm usually able to shield until I'm able to pull it. So yeah, that's why I only pack 1. Then we have 2 meditations in the main deck. So this is really good against ice. Really counters ice, honestly. Really good against storm, who run the lightning elf pet. You can use a meditation to just, they'll do 200 and you'll get an 800 heal from it. So that's just like super broken. Then against myth with the obsidian colossus, it's good. With fire against elephant, super good. So generally this is just really good to have 2 meditations for any DOTs. Then I have 1 sanctuary. I have a lot of bubbles in, and this is really good. I tend to use the sanctuary against balance, fire. Those are the 2, death. Those are balance, fire, death. Not really against ice. I tend not to use the sanctuary. I sometimes can. Sometimes if you want to just reset the game against ice, you can use sanctuary. But it's a really good alternative because it can usually help you more than it helps them, especially if you're trying to survive. Since you output more damage, you can typically heal up with berry surprises and then just change it back at your convenience, or they will change it and they lose a bubble from it. So either way, it's a way to put you at a more advantageous playing field. I guess you could even use it against myth. I tend not to use it against myth because myth tends to satyr a lot, but you can also use it against myth. It's at least better than a time of legend, and they may even change it again. So yeah, generally good to have the sanctuary. It just adds another bubble into your deck, and it will reduce their bubble by 1 if they end up trying to fight it. So overall, really, really good card. Then I have 3 satyrs. I had this big debate, 3 or 4 satyrs, wasn't really sure. Right now I'm settled on 3. 4 is also viable, but because I'm running such a small deck, I always get the 3 satyrs, so it's not really an issue. I tend to use satyr against balance. So what's really nice is that Lore Master does 700. If they have a weakness, it does 400, which costs 4 pips. So satyr, for 1, even just out heals a normal Lore Master. So if they were just to keep Lore Master 3 times in a row and you were to satyr 3 times in a row, you would actually come out ahead. So by like 300, actually by 450 health, because satyr is 860. So overall, it's just a really, really strong spell against balance, against fire, against pretty much every school. Once you get to like 1,000 HP, just pop a satyr and you're almost back in the game. So yeah, but I'd say really save it against balance. And yeah, that balance is when you want to satyr the most. Normally you can bury surprise, but balance you just want to satyr. Then I have 3 ether shields against just lives and deaths. It's just good to have. It's really hard to win as a life if you don't have um, the ether shield. So you kind of have to rely on towers, but once you run out, it's really annoying. And I tend to use no sideboard TCs against life practically every game. So I don't want to be going into my sideboard to draw tower shields, especially early on in the game against life. So it's just good to have. And then death as well. You don't want to, wraith into this. So it's really good to prevent wraiths. And if they end up using poison, you can just use meditation. So lots of counterplay there with the 3 ether shields. Then 3 myth shields. Sometimes I run 4, sometimes I run 3. It really depends. Right now, normally I'd been running 4, but right now I'm in a phase of 3. Uh, and so it's been pretty decent. I've beat the last couple myths I've fought with this new little deck variation. So yeah, so far it's been working out pretty good. It's really nice because they can't really Obsidian Colossus into this. They can't really, you know, yeah, they really are hesitant to hit through this versus a lot of myth wizards will hit through the tower shield. So it's really good. And also, if they betrayal, it only leaves 1 trap instead of 3. So, lots of good reasons to use the myth shield. It just kind of counteracts that like weak point of not having that 3rd shield since you're running the ether shield. Then I have 2 dooming glooms. This one's literally just for life and death, or life and ice, which are pretty much the 2 schools that spam heals. Kind of needed against life. If you have the 2 dooming glooms, it's just really good. It's pretty much useless against other schools. I tend not to use it and just delete it instantly. Unless I'm like fighting a bubble war or in some like advantageous position, then I'll use it. But typically just for life and ice, and very rare occasions other schools. 2 infections. I used to be running 3 infections, but I hardly used it other than life. I would never use infections. Hardly ever, maybe against myth, but I'm tending not to even use them against myth. Just when I'm going for like kill shots, it's good to apply some extra pressure. If I have 0 pips and just need an infection into a clanker, that's like pretty solid. So I have 2 infections. Then 3 berry surprises. Right now I have the healing path. You can also use the damage path. I actually really like the damage path. I alternate between the damage and the healing like all the time because the damage path does 1,000 plus 450 heal, which is like I guess 1450 net value. And then the heal path, if you have a bubble, it'll do like 450, 600. So it's 675 heal, which is like way less net value, but still decent. Since I think like the health on the storms maybe adds a little more value. So kind of debatable which one is better. I think if you have bubble, the damage route's better, but if you don't, then I'd prefer the healing route. Kind of up to you. So yeah, it just depends on your style. But yeah, you can use Berry Surprise in any situation, to clear a shield. I like to use it into tower shields. I like to use it into just like, even if I'm at like 1800 health and I have an infection, I'll use it just to heal up a little bit. So lots of good options to use Berry Surprise and just kind of keep yourself at full health. It's a really good spell for just keeping yourself at full health while still applying pressure and tempo. Then I have 3 Catalans. Catalans, I think, are far superior to a lot of other spells. Even Triton, I tend to use Catalan more than I use Triton, mainly because it just gives that 35% weakness. And so, say you're going against fire, they hit you for, like 1,200, 1,300, and they could kill you next round in like 2 hits, like with like a double Elephant or something like that. You can Catalan after their first Elephant, and now they can no longer kill you, and then you are now in kill range, and now you can apply pressure. So lots of situations for Catalan. I was using it a lot into Myth. I think that was a really big mistake, so I've stopped using it against Myth as much, unless I have a shield up already. Trying not to add more than 1 infection or weakness to Myth, I think is really good, but to all other schools, this is just a great spell. And if you have a bubble up, it does like 1,400, which is really, really good. Then cleanse. This is really good against just infections, kind of, especially if it's like turn like 2 or 3. If they put an infection on you and you cleanse charm, it's almost like both your moves were negated and now you're both at higher pips. And storm is advantageous because you have higher base damage. So yeah, pretty decent. Max bubbles, obviously, just to fight the bubble war. Even start the bubble war. I tend to just mess around with bubbles a lot. It really puts people into uncomfortable situations because they have to start deleting cards for bubbles. It doesn't let them dig into the TC deck as much. It really just applies a lot of pressure if you know how to navigate bubbles well. And considering I have the Sanctuary and then also the Hat bubble, that's like 6 bubbles, and then 2 Doom and Glooms, so 8 bubbles. And then also the 2 Thundermans, 10 bubbles. So really in a good spot to start Bubble Wars. So that's generally good. The other thing, I guess, if you're fighting a Bubble War is sometimes it's better not to use the Thunderman unless you have a lot of pips and just reshuffle and use these again. So lots of different options there. Then we have 4 disarm spells. So this is really good if, they blade first round, second round, whatever, and you just disarm. You are at an advantageous state because you have more pips or equal amount of pips, but a larger number, and you have a higher base damage. So against most schools, it's just always beneficial just to disarm if they blade. You come out ahead unless you're in like some weird game state. Then lightning bats. I have 1 lightning bats just to break shields. Might take this one out. I don't know, but it's pretty decent. If you do not run this current wand, with this current wand that only gives 2 storm wands, then I think it's kind of needed to just have lightning bats. Catch of the Day, something I recently got. So far, it's been good. This one's a fun spell to use. It's really nice to use Catch of the Day into a lightning elf into a blade, because then they kind of are forced to shield twice, and you could even lightning elf again, which will be doing a lot. So it's like, generally Catch of the Day is a really good spell. I've liked it. Queen Calypso, this is good against life, good against myth, good against fire. Really, if you just want to apply, break a shield and apply an infection, this is just a good spell to have in your arsenal. And then also if you're going against life, I tend to build up max pips, get a bubble up, wait for them not to fight the bubble, and then Calypso them into a shield. And then now there's a bubble up and a infection on them, and they kind of have to choose: do I shield, clear the infection, or clear the bubble? And at that point, it's GG since I'm at max pips. So that's the only reason why this Queen Calypso's in, versus some occasional ways to put it with the myth. Okay, that'll be part 1 of this video, and yeah.